Today is June 5th, 2024. This is episode 78 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I am joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over a couple of the big names that made their decision on NBA draft withdrawal deadline day, and at the end, we might add a creative draft about what we would change in college hoops. So, Joe, let's start with the guy who was on the thumbnail. That is Coleman Hawkins. He's made the rounds on social media. He will not be coming back to Illinois. He does withdraw at the final hour. How shocked were you to see Coleman coming back for a fifth year of college hoops?
Sean, as time went on, I felt like it was less and less surprising. I think initially when he went in, a lot of people, especially the way he was talking about his loyalty to Illinois, and not that that should even be questioned in this case, and they thought he was a goner, and no one really discussed it much. I think a lot of people were concerned about a guy we're going to talk about later in terms of the college basketball picture. But him coming back has to be discussed in that entire scene now, especially as we've gotten really a week after deadline day, and as we're having fewer and fewer guys left in the transfer portal, as we'll talk about later on here tonight. So I think some of his comments were interesting about where he would go. You know, he said maybe a school where he could watch a football game. I think that's a little disingenuous to some of our In a Nutshell listeners, to Brett Bielema, who's done a heck of a job for the football program for the Illini. But, Sean, this could go a lot of different ways. I think, you know, Louisville's certainly in there. Kansas State, maybe even a UNC enters the fray. I think it's still pretty early on. I can't really get a read on this recruitment. Where you think? I think the safest thing to say for me is he just won't be in the Big Ten, but that is not even close to narrowing the pool.
Yeah, he has ruled that out as sort of respect to the Illinois fans. But Joe, like he's going on social media saying whatever to a bunch of different people. It's almost like whatever he ends up actually saying might not even be like thought of being true at first, because he's been telling people, you know, all these new schedules come out and all these big non-conference games. And he's like, oh, I get to play my old team. Well, 3 of the teams that he's linked are playing Illinois this year. So what does that mean? But I think I have no read on this. Louisville seems to be the favorite, but, you know, Arkansas has still got a bunch of roster spots open. And, you know, it shouldn't be at this point with how desperate some of these teams are, how much of an NIL bag Coleman will ask for. Could be in the Great Osibor range, but you know that should narrow the teams even more, but it's not at this point. And something that you'll just have to keep looking out for here, as you know, students are back on campus and summer practices have started in some places. So definitely something to look out for, but I agree with you in the fact that the longer it went on, the more likely he was going to return. And there was someone else, Joe, who didn't even make a statement or really anything until the day after. He did end up getting the paperwork in time to withdraw, but that's Jackson Robinson, the BYU standout. We talked about him multiple times last year. And we also, when we previewed Kentucky and what they look like, we kind of figured, well, if they can get him, they can really turn the corner. They do get him. Mark Pope gets his best player from Provo in the door. Ducky has a lot of players, Joe. Not quite the type of roster that BBN is used to, but with the Robinson ad, you'd think that's it for Kentucky. How would you grade their offseason, and where do you think they lie going into next year?
I think with Jackson Robinson, and I'm shocked this wasn't talked about more nationally, even within their own conference, and that's likely because we could just say his name by now, but likely with the return of Sears to Alabama and all the other transfer nonsense they've done. But Jackson Robinson going to, I think a lot of people, their last memory of him was scoring 25 on Duquesne, kind of in the last-ditched effort to get BYU back in that game. So getting a guy like that, an experienced guard, that's what Kentucky fans begged John Calipari to do. I don't think they've ever once had this kind of veteran experience, albeit not from Kentucky, on a team. So I think they're more than open to this. I think they welcome it. I think at first, the beginning of the Mark Pope era, for maybe the first 48 hours, the fans might not have been I think they were misled partly. I think that I really believe that job is probably top 3 in college basketball, and they were swayed that they could get a Patino, Stevens, Donovan, but none of those guys in reality could pose for any job, let alone in college basketball or in the NBA. I mean, take a look at Brad Stevens. He's a freaking GM now, not a coach. So with all that said, Sean, he's knocked it out of the park. I think from the press conference on, I don't think he's had one misstep. I think maybe they weren't perfect in the portal, but you could say that for any coach in college basketball. And maybe they really would have wanted Janelle Davis, but I think getting Jackson Robinson, a guy who knows this offense, that's the best case scenario. And it's hard to argue against them having anything less than an A- or an A for this offseason, Sean.
Yeah, I'll ask you a quick question at the end of this, Joe, but in pro sports, which college basketball is kind of at right now with NIL, most leagues, except for the MLB, have a salary cap. And you hear the saying, like, everybody can't be a star. And Kentucky filled out their roster pretty well, but they were missing a star. I think Robinson fills that void. And, now you start to think about, if John Calipari was this team's coach, where would they be ranked? And where do you think they end up being ranked in the preseason? Give me a blind guess number.
I think the only fair way to do that would be to swap Arkansas and Kentucky. And then you'd put a premium on Kentucky because they are Kentucky, and Calipari plus Kentucky does equal high rankings. You might put them at a top 10 if you swap Arkansas and Kentucky, but if you put Calipari as the coach of this team that Mark Pope brought, let's just say in some reality, I think I'll answer both versions of that. It'd be hard for me to believe, outside of the assumed top 3, which is some combo of Kansas, Alabama, and why am I blanking? Kansas, Alabama,
Connecticut,
maybe Sean. Yeah, and UConn.
Yeah.
They could be anywhere from 4 to 7 or 4 to 6 if Calipari was their coach. So certainly a top 10 or top 20-ish roster at worst for Mark Pope.
Yeah, I think they'll be in the top 15 to start the preseason. And Mark Pope has had a bunch of great analytical teams over the years. If you look back on it, like the last 6 years, his teams have been as good as Kentucky and Ken Pom averaged out. Now, on the court is a different story, and they both bowed out in the round of 64 last year to teams that they were better than. But it seems like the one thing holding Kentucky and the national media back right now about Kentucky is the coach and the sort of uncertainty of so many of these players. But you get your star, and I think that the ceiling of this team can now be reached because Jackson Robinson will be an NBA player. It just will be a year later than people thought. Now, Joe, you said them earlier. Mark Sears does come back to Alabama. You mentioned there's a top 3. Do you think – I think they have to be number 1 right now with their ads at the 5 and they're with Amori and then retaining Sears at the 1. Nate Oates' offense, up and down the floor, you get your rim protector. Got to be number 1 for me.
Yeah, I think they're number 1 in terms of roster. So if we're going to take coaches out of it entirely, I'd give them number 1 for roster. The only one who would hold a candle in terms of proven talent on the floor would be Kansas. But how Zeke Mayo and how A.J. Stork fit in, because they're both great players, and Rylan Griffin too. It's going to be interesting to see that combination. But Alabama didn't really lose all that much. You get Sears back with the addition of Cliff. I don't think a lot of people really give credit for how big that transfer is going to be. Having a defensive guy, a post protector, could take their defense to a whole new level, maybe even help out their offense, because we all know in college basketball, with great defense, that will lead to an even better offense. Certainly he has limitations in his offensive game, but the guy could dunk, the guy could score from down low if he has to, and he's not going to be asked to a lot in this offense. A schematic guy like Oates will avoid him having to do that.
I think having the rim protector allows Alabama to play their way more. Like, they can flood everything inside. They can take risks on defense. They can play up tempo. They can shoot a lot of threes. He might get a ton of offensive rebounds this year. And he got a ton last year at Rutgers because they weren't exactly the best at putting the ball in the bucket. But I think it's sort of how Creighton plays with Kalkbrenner. They basically feed everything to him. And when he was hurt was it 22, not this past season, but the year before, they lost 6 games in a row. I feel like Amori could have that big of an impact on the Alabama defense. Now, they'll still win games if he does get hurt, but they can take a bunch of risks. They can feed things towards him. I think it's just going to be a whole lot better. They were the number 1 offense by quite a margin last year and well down there on defense. But I think that their defense will be pretty good efficiency-wise. Now, they might play like 100 to 90 games quite often, but on a possession-by-possession basis, they should be in a good spot. They were 111 in defense last year. That's because Grant Nelson was their 5. He didn't even play he wasn't even like a mid-major sized center. He gets to move to the 4 this year. He returns. He can shoot it. He can spread the floor. I think Amori is a big add, and once you bring back probably the best point guard in the country, I think they're number 1 also. We'll go over to the Big East here quickly, Joe. We have some news for a team that we have, I think, rightfully disrespected this offseason. They do get a little bit of good news, though. They get Eric Dixon back, and they get transfer Wooga Poplar from Miami, and that's Villanova. Kyle Neptune, you say it all the time, it's a make-it-or-break-it year for him, and it'll be year 3 for him at the helm, but where does this bring the expectations for Villanova?
I think from where they were a week ago, which was a very scary sight, think about this, Sean.
They were probably 10th in the Big East last year.
Yeah.
Or last week.
They were a decision away from having no Eric Dixon and a completely unproven roster, and probably 3 or 4 scholarship spots open. Luckily, that is not the case. They either get Wooga Poplar, they get Eric Dixon back. I think getting Eric Dixon back alone made them more relevant, like maybe middle of the range there in the Big East. Wooga Poplar, I'm not saying it moves the needle to the top 3 in the Big East, which is going to assume to be UConn, Creighton, St. John's, and then you throw Xavier in there too. I think I discounted them last time, and that's really my fault because they acted early in the transfer portal and they weren't necessarily in the wave of things when the market was hot. But Sean, is it plausible to say that Villanova is a top 5 Big East team with this addition and Eric Dixon back, or is it going to be a lot more development?
I don't think so. I mean, I think this might get them inside the top 100 in KenPom maybe. This might take the disaster season out, but I know the Big East did only get 3 teams in the dance last year, but teams 4, 5, and 6 were pretty good teams. That would be St. John's just missed, Seton Hall just missed, and Butler was right there too, but I'm forgetting another team that just missed, Providence. All 3 of those teams were really close out. If I can't see them getting into that range, like bubble or just in, just out. I don't think they're quite there yet. You have a rejuvenated Xavier. You have a rejuvenated Georgetown. St. John's is loaded. Seton Hall is going to take a step back, but DePaul won't go 0-20, I don't think. So I do think the Big East is loaded, and I think a top 5 would be a tremendous year for Villanova at this point. And I think it's at least somewhat possible now. You bring back a couple of veterans. They did lose Mark Armstrong to the NBA draft, a little bit of a puzzling one there. They did get a transfer commitment from Max Shulga from VCU, but it turns out he's just going back to VCU. So I do think they might not be done yet. I think they were waiting for a couple other decisions, too, from other players in the transfer portal, but I think
they have 2 open scholarships according to what I'm looking at now. And by the way, Sean, and Bart Torvik, they do have them number 27. So Torvik loves them. I know you don't.
They were 54th before the Dixon and Poplar were added into the numbers, which is pretty crazy.
Which is pretty high without those 2 there. So wow.
Yeah, that they might be a candidate for, biggest change from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. Usually it's a mid-major team that starts out in the hundreds and ends up being terrible, but I mean, Villanova could be 50 spots worse than 20 and still make the tournament. So, interesting one there. Not sure what Torvik has cooking up those numbers there, but I think Villanova's team last year was better than this coming year, and they weren't a very good team. They were ugly. They were not fun to watch. All right, Joe, we've got a couple more draft withdrawals. We've got one who does not have a home yet. That is Jameer Watkins from Florida State. Two teams seem to be leading the charge there, and that is St. John's and what's the second one? Michigan, that's right.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Sean, I think this was the missing piece. We've talked at length, partly because of homerism on this show in the offseason about the Michigan Wolverines. It was also in part because they have 7 freaking new transfers on the team, and now this might be the 8th. The way it's looking as of June the 5th at 9:14 Eastern, if you really made me make a prediction on this, I do think he's going to be a Michigan Wolverine. Michigan's getting him on campus this week. Dusty May did say both publicly and on certain podcasts that he's looking to start summer practice next week with the full roster, with that one open slot left. One would have to assume that's Jameer Watkins. Now, there is a weird situation with Zion Sensley, yes. He's committed to St. Mary's. Sean, famously, this was a month ago. This didn't make as many headlines as I thought it would. I was believing he was trying to get out of his letter of intent there, and St. Mary's was giving him a really hard time, which is really rare to see, and it's really rare to see publicized. I don't doubt that doesn't happen behind the scenes, but to have it get leaked out there is not a great sign. So he could be the last edition, but I'm going to side with Watkins, and it's prevailing Twitter rumor out there that he's no longer visiting St. John's, which would narrow it down solely to Michigan. Now, he is 6'7". I think he's closer to 6'5" than a 6'8", 6'9", so he wouldn't fill out the 4 per se, or he'd be a stretch 4. But average 16.8 a game, decent three-point shooter, gets to the basket really well. Sean, is it crazy for me to think that with the addition of him, Michigan could be a top 15 team?
Maybe a little bit. That might be it's just really tough to give the brand new teams top 15 because especially with the new coach. Now, if they have a coach and a couple of rotation players returning, then you kind of know what they're going to be. But new coach, new system, a ton of new players. You get one FAU player in the door at Michigan, and that's Vlad Golden. I think we'll see him in the top 25 if they get Watkins because he's that good. But the 15 to 25 range in the AP or whatever way too early top 25 that you are looking at is just a total mess of uncertainty. I think the top 15, there's a pretty solid top 15 teams that will probably be ranked to start the year and will probably be ranked for most of the year, but I think we'll see a pretty revolving door around the 15 to 25. I think Michigan might be in there, but we still don't know how the forwards are going to work there between Wolf and Golden, whether they're going to play together or separate, and who's going to be the lead guy. If it's Watkins, certainly you would think it's going to be him, and if it's not, then what exactly happens? But I think St. John's is, they're a little bit short on getting the ball opportunities. I'm not sure how many scholarships they have left, but Kadari's going to want the ball. Davion Smith is going to want the ball. There's only one ball. I think you can, if you don't like Kansas's roster, you might be able to tuck yourself into that one there. But Watkins leaning Michigan, and unless something drastic changes, I think he's going to be a Wolverine. Good sign for Michigan is, new look Big Ten. A lot of change in the Big Ten, just one first teamer returning. That's Braden Smith. So get all the talent you can get and see where you finish. I think everybody picked Purdue to finish first last year. I don't think we have that team this year in the Big Ten. Maybe 5 teams could win the league, and that's more than really any year that I remember.
Yeah, Sean. And one last thing on St. John's. You also have Simeon Wiltshire. But that's a guy to keep an eye on, rising through the ranks, was a 5-star.
It's a good true freshman, too.
Really good true freshman.
Limited minutes.
So I think he'll be He's another reason why a guy like Jameer Watkins wouldn't want to go to St. John's. Another guy to take the ball away. So doesn't not a slight on St. John's at the slightest, more a style play deal. But Sean, we can move on.
Yeah, you get R.J. Lewis there too. You think
Yeah.
if everything goes right, those three are starting with Lewis, and that's kind of where you're at right now. They do have Iwuchukwu. I think he's a USC transfer.
Yep.
He's probably going to start at the 5. So if Watkins goes in, one of those guys is getting bumped from the starting lineup. Not sure how they're going to like that. They get Aaron Scott, the UNT transfer. He can, he'll shoot it off the bench. But I think St. John's roster, it might be okay without Watkins. Like, he's a great player, but you might want to just, like, you've got the roles that you have, and like very few teams have like an open star role. Kentucky was one of them. They needed Robinson, but if you bring in somebody at the top at this time of year, everybody drops a peg, and I'm not sure that's a good idea. 3-4 months before official the season even starts. But Joe, we've got one more draft withdrawal. This one was a little bit more surprising to me. It's Trayvon Brazil from Arkansas, played there for 2 years under Musselman. Very solid when he was out there, had some injury troubles, but he is returning to the Hogs to play for the new coach, John Calipari. The Hogs have a loaded roster. What do you think about Brazil going back to Fayetteville?
I think it's a default answer is byproduct of NIL, which is great for Arkansas. I really wonder if USC was ever an option. Do you think it was?
I don't think so, because there are very few rumors around him like coming back at all. And kind of out of nowhere, it seemed pretty quick. So I don't think so.
Yeah. Now, how he's going to fit in is going to be pretty interesting. I don't know if Calipari's really X's and O'd that, or if he's going to do the typical go out there and I'll figure it out. I think it's definitely more of the latter than the former. But another guy could rebound, another guy who could... I know he only averaged 9 a game, but he can score pretty efficiently if he has to. I think you'd want him to get his field goal percentage up. Other than that shot, I don't think John Calipari is going to develop him so much. But
yeah, I think he's already there. I mean,
yeah.
You could say that last year. He was probably supposed to be a one and done.
Yeah. But all that said, Sean, just another toy with Calipari to throw in that little Toy Story army. So I think it's definitely a positive. I don't know if this ascends Arkansas so much. I think it really helps them, but I don't know if it puts them over the top quite yet, which isn't crazy to say in year one of any era, let alone a Hall of Famer like John Calipari. But would this put them over the edge? Let's say you had them a little below a Kentucky, Tennessee, certainly not even in the conversation of Alabama, but would this put them up maybe in that Auburn range, in the Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky range?
Yeah, I think that's where I see him right now, that 4th, 5th range in the SEC. Mm-hmm. They have the stars. They have the good players. They just need, like, who's going to be the role player? Who's going to be the 10 to 15-minute guys off the bench who can do a job? They don't really have anybody that has ever done that before. They have Wagner, Fierro, and Ivisic from Kentucky. They have Carter Knox, Billy Richmond, Boogie Fland, all coming in as freshmen, pretty highly rated. You expect them to at least be a part of the rotation. And then you get Janelle Davis from FAU, and now Trayvon Brazil back from Arkansas. So, like, where is this rotation going to be? Who's going to start? You've got probably 4 forwards that could start. Is Boogie gonna play the point? Is Janelle gonna play the point? Is DJ Wagner gonna play the 3? There's a ton of questions about how this is gonna look for Arkansas. Calipari has done the get as much talent as you can thing and figured it out before, but we could see this lineup kind of being like any of 6 or 7 options right now. That's what I'm looking forward to most early on in the season. Who's playing what position, really, and that's kind of a little bit more simple than it actually is.
And Sean, just to add a point, we did just talk about Michigan. I kind of view Michigan as the same thing. I think they have an excess of position, which is guards. You have Ronnie Gale, you have Trey Donaldson. You have Gale Donaldson, Scott.
Pippen,
Sorry, blanking on the name. Justin Pippen, and
Jones.
yeah. So you have an embarrassment of riches at guards. Kind of no solution at the floor. No proven solution between Walters and Cheddar. And funnily enough, Sean, Michigan and Arkansas are playing each other in the Jimmy V Classic early December. I think those teams are going to be measured against each other because they're in very similar situations. Got a bunch of experienced guys, but then a decent number of guys, in their second or third year that have shown flashes but haven't quite got there yet. So I think these two teams, maybe not style of play, but in terms of situation, extremely similar and going to be fascinating to watch. One caveat is the obvious. The SEC looks a lot more loaded with proven commodities than the Big Ten, but I wouldn't be shocked if people measure these two programs against each other this year, not in the slightest.
Yeah, I think Michigan, if you had to guess a starting lineup now for Michigan, I think it's Gale, Donaldson, Jones, Wolf, and Golden.
Yeah, maybe
right.
Namari for Jones.
Maybe
one off the bench. That's
but
a six man. But yeah,
I think 4 of those are locked in. Arkansas, now coached by John Calipari. Is anybody a guaranteed starter at this point?
Janelle Davis has to be, you would think, right?
I don't know. I'm hearing some rumors that Calipari promised Boogie Flan to start. Maybe Davis plays the 2. I don't know. I think the fact that there might be one is pretty telling. Like Brazil plays the 4 or the 5, small ball 5. You have Adu, who is probably starting at the 5, but against mid-majors, maybe he doesn't start at the 5 because you want to stretch the floor. You've got Avicic. He could start at the 4 or the 5. Like Wagner at the 3 or Knox at the 3. The arrow, is he a 3, a 4, or a small ball 5? Like there is a ton of questions around Arkansas. Questions around Michigan for sure, but I think at least we're going to know who's going to be in what spot. Like if Walters comes in the game, one of the other bigs will be in there. If Namari could slide down to the 2. But other than that, I think Donaldson's your point guard, Gale's your backup when he's not in the game. And, you probably have 3 guards on the floor most times, whether it's Jones or Burnett at the 3, and then you have 2 of the 3 bigs on the floor. So
yeah. You're not going to have a freshman contributing on Michigan so much as, and to Calipari's credit, he will have, between Boogie Flan and Carter Knox, I think those guys are going to have to contribute heavily. Michigan's not going to have to rely on any freshmen. I think freshman contributing at Michigan is going to be more of a luxury than a necessity.
Yeah, both of those 2 could start for the Hogs.
Easily.
Very, maybe not game 1, but definitely before the calendar turns for sure. But Joe, right at 28 minutes today, we're going to finish up with what is supposed to be a fun segment. I didn't give you much preparation. Honestly, I thought of it not too long ago either. We're each going to say 3 things that we would change about college basketball. It could be as simple or as funky or as complex as you want it. But I have one first, and I will be standing in for Mike because he's had this take before. I think we need to get rid of the 9 p.m. Monday Big 12 game on ESPN. I know it's a TV thing, but it is the Big 12 is now over a much, much larger piece of land than it used to be. You cannot make teams play a tough game on Saturday and then make them turn around and play 48 hours later on Monday. I don't like it. Thoughts?
Sean, I think a lot of college football and college basketball fans should listen to the Joel Klatt podcast today. They had the executive of Fox explaining the TV draft for college football, albeit 12 to 16 games is a lot different than 30 to 40 games a year. But he explains how that works, how they draft it. I'm not saying you have to agree or disagree with the guy. I think seeing it from that perspective is interesting, but there are certain things in college sports that need to be changed across the board, whether it's football, basketball. Monday at 9 p.m., the only thing kids should be watching Monday at 8 or 8 to 11 is Monday Night Football, the occasional NHL game, or Monday Night Raw. College basketball could have one off night, and that's Monday. I'm a bigger fan of Friday games, and I slightly say that cautiously because those are what a lot of premier high school basketball games are. And like football, I think each level has to have their night. High school could be Friday, Saturdays for college football, college, Sundays for the NFL. I would love to see college basketball kind of abide by that. Albeit Monday might be a really boring night then because I don't know too many high schools that play on Mondays, at least in New Jersey and the state of Michigan. But I really like the take, Sean. And maybe Monday night maybe that could be a Big East night. Who knows? Big East 7 p.m.
Or so Mondays in the Big 12 world, Monday is treated as like the midweek game.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just treat it as a weekend game, and you could play Thursday or Friday the before or after. Like the Saturday Monday turnaround is really the big issue, and you're not going to move college basketball off Saturday because that's it's packed. If you really want to, you could watch 14 straight hours of college hoops. I've done it before. Definitely recommend if there's a bunch of good games on. But I just think this is why you get so many like dud Big 12 performances after big wins on Saturday. It's because they're traveling a large distance in 48 hours on short prep to another raucous environment. Like, you're just not going to get the same level of performance. All right. How about your take?
Sean, they need to bring back these challenges. Big Ten ACC, how you kill that's unspeakable. Gavitt Games, this is going to be the first year, I believe, without them. Unspeakable. And I know there's all these premier tournaments, the Jimmy or events, Jimmy V, Champions Classic, all your MTEs. Besides the MTEs, though, the Jimmy V's of the world, the Champions Classic, the Jordan Brand Classic, and what's the last one I'm missing? The Crossroads, but that's unique to Indiana, so I
that's
don't really
that's over too.
And that is over. Yeah. Events like that, though, cater to the rich and the richer of college basketball. If you really want to bring this back, let's do the Big Ten ACC, do the Big Ten SEC. I don't care what the challenge is. They need to bring that back. That's ridiculous. You have college basketball programs hiring third party. If Michigan does this, they are not alone in doing this. I will be very clear. Now, whether teams are going to go out and admit this or not, that's their choice. They're hiring third party people, not only for scouting, not only for recruiting, but for scheduling, seeing what teams.
That's been the case for a couple years now, really since COVID. But there are people whose livelihoods are, their job is to schedule college basketball games. Instead of just the coaches calling them up like they used to a couple of years ago. Hey, you want to play around these dates? Oh, yeah, sure, let's do it. No, not that anymore.
Yeah, and I think with that, you'd have to be a little familiar with the process. Admittedly, I am not. But that's just crazy. I think that's pretty insane. I think you need to have certain set games because now that coaches could opt out so much or opt in so much, that should still be a thing, but you need to have 3 or 4 non-conference games set where there's maybe not a prime time opponent that's going to help your resume a lot, but something the fans could tune into. Someone will be interested in watching on a TV or on campus because I'm getting pretty sick of teams like Ole Miss last year just going 12-0, and that really did them no good in the end, Sean. They didn't get into the tournament. They were falsely ranked in the top 20 because of it. And I'm not saying that's on Chris Beard. To an extent, I'm going to say it is, but that can't happen. They didn't have 2 or 3 set. That way, teams that are being avoided, especially the mid-majors who no one wants to schedule, they could have some kind of way to play these premier games without begging and pleading.
I think I agree with that mostly, Joe, because the games are on the campus sites. And other than the MTs and the top neutral court games, I just think they don't do it for me, the neutral court games. They're never full. They're, in weird places, honestly. Get the games on the campus sites. That's why college sports, are treated on a higher level than pro sports. It's because of the college football and the college basketball environments on Saturday afternoons. That's really it. So, all right, take number 2 for me. Let's see. Oh, piggybacking off of your first take. Now, one of these kind of already happened, but those challenges should be in February. Break up the conference slate, break up the monotony, I believe Big 12 SEC is in February. I think another, like if they're not playing conference play, then nobody should. Do a Big 10 Big East challenge in one weekend in February and just break up the monotony of the non-conference. You saw Illinois and Duke schedule a game at MSG in late February a couple days ago. You see Gonzaga play Kentucky in February. I just think it's cool to sort of break up the monotony of conference play, especially when those teams kind of all play similar, whether it's the SEC, Big 10, Big East, something like that.
Sean, that's a great one. I think I don't really see a downside to it. There is no downside.
You can give up one weekend.
You can give up one weekend, and if you lose, who cares? If you schedule, like, Illinois playing Duke, that's an extreme example on the higher end of this. No one's going to knock you, unless they're in the unique case that each of those teams are really bad. But on a neutral floor, losing to a 1-50 team's not going to kill you at all. And losing even a quad 2 loss in that department wouldn't kill you at all. So that's a really good one. One thing I'd be cautious about is if we do have those set, certain teams can't opt out of it. That's one caveat I would say would have to be in there. Because, as teams are scouting right now, as is. They follow the transfer portal with everyone like us fans do. If you have this set up early and teams could pull out now, that happened with Michigan and Kentucky a few years back. One chickened out of the other. I really don't know who did, but that's really bad if that happens. It needs to be set every year. I think that's the one caveat because I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, most of the reason that those challenges broke up was because of TV contracts. And, Big 10 and ACC used to be together because they were both by ESPN. And, some of them can go across a Big 12, Big East. Big East is Fox now. So, Gavitt Games is Fox. That's why that was a thing. So, I think a lot of that has to do with TV contracts, too, which, is both good and bad in certain ways. But all right, Joe, give us take 2.
This is this might be from a place of privilege with a guy who went to a football school, who's a fan of a football school. Stop putting college basketball games on championship Saturday on college football, so the first Saturday of December. And for the love of God, do not put them on the same day as a regular season college football game. These athletic departments have plenty of money. These athletic departments have plenty of smart people working there that know this. That is out of this world. Because if you're a Midwestern school that has hockey, you already have hockey and football overlapping on a lot of fall Saturdays. To put basketball in that, especially early in November and early in December, is completely unnecessary. Now, I think an argument could be made, my football team, I hate to pick on Indiana here. I'm an Indiana fan. We'll never play in Indianapolis, even though they came damn close one year. I really don't care if they play on Saturday. Fine, but I think uniformly, I'm really talking to the football schools out here. Do not do that to your fan base. And do not do that to your basketball team. No one is going to be locked in. People will be scrolling their phones. And I've seen the effects of this at a Michigan game, the day of the Big Ten title game in 2021. It was a noon game. 8 hours later, Michigan was playing in the Big Ten title game. Half the place was empty because half the people have joint season tickets with the other, and they were in Indianapolis. So that cannot happen. And it could be unique just to my fan base and unique to the region of the country I'm in. But that is so beyond ridiculous, and it kind of takes the excitement out of the early season games, which is that's one of my favorite points of the season because everyone still believes they have a chance. It
doesn't seem like moving the basketball game to Sunday at noon is that big of a deal.
No.
It's a weekend
Friday
game.
Night.
Or even Friday night.
I get it takes away from high school, but if you're on campus, you're not going to see high school games. Who cares?
And they have moved games on Saturday before. Like if Big Ten football is at noon, sometimes they'll push the game back, but still, a different day is better for everybody involved, really. I think that's just sort of a common sense thing, and, unfortunately the NCAA doesn't like that all the time. But, all right, last take here as we hit the 40-minute mark. Let's see. I could go a number of different ways here. I think this is another obvious one. Transfer portal should not open until after the Elite Eight. I think I think it's probably a little bit too crazy to say until after the Final Four, just because there's so few teams involved in that. But coaches should not be recruiting while their season's like in the balance. If you make the Final Four, okay, 4 teams can be punished with having to do that. But like 32 teams should not be like all these teams were hosting recruits on at their round of 64 site. Like I just think that's totally unnecessary. I really do.
College hockey, I believe, do not quote me on this, but I'm very confident saying they have some iteration of that. So
I think that'll come too.
Yeah, I think it can be accomplished. The only take I would put there is it's really not going to stop tampering. And to be honest with you, it might make tampering worse in a way because
it might.
It happens it happens as we speak. It's probably happening right now, and it'll happen before a round of 64 game. You're never going to convince me it doesn't. That's the only concern one would have in that, but until it gets regulated, Sean, having it in writing is probably a good thing. That way, less and less people do it. But in terms of these rules, no one follows them anyway. So I'm not saying in an ideal world having that would be great, but in today's world where everyone's cheating and skirting the rules, I wouldn't pick that as my third, but I do agree with the take.
Now, going back to that, do you think somebody is going to be made an example and take the brunt for all of these people who think the rules are a suggestion? Like, do you think they'll come? And do you think that'll stop it? Do you think somebody will be the sacrificial lamb?
Yeah. The NCAA did it to my own football team. I hate making this a Michigan-centric thing, but that's the prime example, Jim Harbaugh. And I'm going to leave Signgate out of this because everyone should have their own take on that, and my take is beyond biased. But in terms of the Hamburger Gate thing, that was Jim's suspension at the beginning of the year. Literally no reasonable person, whether you were an Ohio State fan, a Notre Dame fan, an Alabama fan, gave a rat's butt about that. He was made an example simply because he made a fuss about profit sharing. And I'm not saying they made an example. I really believe they made an example of him
for
because
sure.
of that.
3 games?
Yeah. But if you want to say it wasn't because of that, fine. They made an example out of him because he broke a stupid rule. So I'm saying they have the power to do it. I don't think Michigan's administration fought that hard enough, but they did get them to bend a knee. So, with that said, they will have no problem doing that to anyone. I think a lot of
there have been a couple who have been accused of tampering.
Yeah.
And they're all kind of the legends of the game. As soon as one of these new up-and-coming guys put their foot where it's not supposed to be, could see some... And we have seen some. We've seen some coaches suspended for a couple games early on in the year. Will Wade, 10 games for McNeese State. They scheduled everybody they could find in November, so those 10 games were up like really quick. But, until you start seeing some like NCAA tournament bans, and those have happened here and there over the years, but I think until somebody is caught, it's not going to stop.
Sean, I'm going to make a bold take here. I think Oklahoma State in 2021 will be the last NCAA tournament ban, unless it's something like beyond bad, like a
transition to D1, but that's just kind of a rule. It's not because they broke a rule.
Well, it's that, or maybe a gambling thing. Now, gambling's probably the one thing that is outside of this realm, but I really believe the NCAA is done with that. With all that said, Sean, yeah, this is a conversation we should have later, but they can railroad someone. It won't be a legend. It won't be anyone in the Hall of Fame. I think messing with Pitino and how that, in 2016-17 when he got fired, everyone was freaking out about it. If you bring it up to someone, they'll bring it up, but could they even describe what that scandal was? They might just go, strippers in a hotel room, strippers in a dorm room. They don't know what actually
It's happened. Not even, confirmed that he even knew that.
Yeah.
Now, he probably did, but... and he never officially got suspended.
And he was cleared, Sean.
And
you have to remember. The independent legal committee cleared him.
And he kind of just left for Europe, and then, the Iona AD had the stones to go out there and get him, and all accounts are that they expected him to be suspended. He wasn't. So, and here he is back in the big time here at St. John's.
Yeah, so I think they kind of got egg on their face in that regard, and that was part of the reason the college basketball world started to take them less and less serious. That was the beginning of it. Now it's just totally in the realm. So I will make one bold take. They will make an example out of someone, not a Hall of Famer, maybe not even an up-and-comer, maybe just a guy they don't like because they'll speak out against him, and it's kind of crazy. That's kind of third world government-ish, but the NCAA isn't far removed from that. Outside of, I don't think they officially kill people or put people on trial in the street, but wouldn't put it past them if they were in a country. But we'll end that there, at least on my side.
You have a third take as we wrap this up? What would you change about college basketball?
This one might be a controversial one, but I think people will begin to understand. I think college basketball, overall, Sean, they need to get rid of these dumb network constraints in a way. I don't know why teams can't play on certain networks. I get college football. They have the whole draft system. They have all Saturday. There's set days. Basketball, they get rid of the games on BTN, ACC network. Now, if it's an irrelevant game, Indiana's playing, I don't know, IUPUI or USC's playing, I couldn't even tell you, Tarleton State. Yeah, you could put those on. You could put those on network television, like the conference networks. But if it's a real game, any interconference game should not be on a network, on a BTN, ACC. At the very least, it should be accessible on ESPN app, Fox Sports app, without any paid subscription. That is beyond ridiculous. There have been plenty of pretty good games, Sean. I'm not saying 1 versus 2 or. But you'll have some 20 versus 22 games, like teams in the top 25.
That's the biggest conference that's a problem, Joe, is the Big 12. There was 6 ranked versus ranked games this year that were on Big 12 network, which is ESPN Plus. It's not a channel offered on most cable subscriptions. So it is a problem in the other conferences, but the Big 12 is where that's the problem the most. And Joe, they're adding more teams this year. I don't know how they're going to do it. We might see some triple header conference days, but I think it is a mess, and I don't think we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah. I think accessibility in the sport's a big thing. Now, you're a true sicko if you're not let's say, a NC State fan. You want to see NC State bury some irrelevant team into the ground on Thursday night. You're a sicko, or you must be gambling on the game. But if NC State's in the top 25 and they're playing Wake Forest, who maybe is on the cusp of being in the tournament, and that's on ACC Network, and you'd have to pay to see it, I don't really agree with that at all, and I don't think a lot of people would. So
there was one pretty common enemy here in our change suggestions to college basketball, and that's the TV networks. And we get basically one less conference this year, which means that'll probably be worse than last year, if we're being honest. So,
yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Our season recap series will be coming back soon. We'll see you next